So, Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Chinendra, Jai Swaminarayan, Sai Ram. Om. 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 Om Bhurbhuva Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimai Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat. Om Bhurbhuva Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimai Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat. Om Bhurbhuva Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimai Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat. Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat. Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat. Once again, a very warm welcome from Women to Women and happy Shivratri. I think majority of them are away praying as it is a big day for us. I'm just putting it right. As you all read, today we're going to do Q&As and obviously Caroline, I'm going to invite her to talk a little bit about what she actually wants from you all. And we're not so many people today, so I would appreciate if you all switch your videos on, because that way we can interact together. I would really appreciate it because it's not nice talking to just the names and not the videos, not the faces. I would appreciate it. Please.
Oh.
Thank you. So, some of you have switched on for me. Thank you.
Good, good, good. Okay.
Yes, as you must have read my link today, it's all about low carb Q&As, because in the group itself, I think we are about 200 people, and only 33 people turned up today. Last time it was 80 odd people, which was brilliant. And that's what I was expecting today as well. Never mind. But like I say, today is a special day for all our Indians. So they probably are celebrating. But in the group itself, there was so many of the questions going left, right, center, and I was getting puzzled, thinking that maybe we're not getting the messages right to you. So it's a good idea if we do Q&As now, get all the questions from you. And we've got Caroline, Daksha, and Reki. Reki can help read the questions from the chat, and then both Daksha and Caroline also can help out in answering. And both Daksha and Ricky will help out with the questions, and Daksha and Caroline will help with the answers, whichever is convenient for both of them, as they're both good at it. So I'm going to invite Caroline. All yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Panna. And we did say it would just be Q&As, but I decided that I might do a very short little presentation to take us right back to the beginning. And my explanation for this is that we did have a chat, Panna and Daksha and I, last week, because we were getting concerned about the amount of information that's going through the WhatsApp group, and a lot of it's very contradictory to what I've been saying in these groups. But also, there were quite a lot of people recommending some of the NHS courses, which is fine. But what I didn't feel was coming across very clearly is that what I've been saying, what Daksha and I believe is a good way to approach nutrition, particularly if you are overweight, pre-diabetic or diabetic, type 2 diabetic. Low carb is absolutely proven to be one of the best ways, and that's why I'm going to do a little mini presentation, because I want to remind you why it's such a good way of managing to either avoid diabetes or to keep your diabetes under control and even reverse it. Now, the Xyla course that's been mentioned quite a lot in the last couple of weeks on the WhatsApp group is an NHS contracted course, and it very much sticks with the NHS approach to diabetes management. And I believe they may mention low carb, but very much low key and nowhere near as low carb as we would recommend. Now, the reason why Daksha and I feel strongly that that's not necessarily the right way to approach managing diabetes is because the NHS have been doing this for the last 40 years. And what's happened in those 40 years is people have continued to get more and more obese. They've continued to develop diabetes in greater and greater numbers and at younger and younger ages. And clearly the way the NHS are dealing with diabetes is not working. Low carb has been shown to work extremely effectively, and it brings us back into the focus of what we should be eating, what the body is designed to eat, what the human is designed to eat. And therefore, if people want to go off and do Xyla courses, that's absolutely fine. If their GP has recommended it, they want to give it a go, please do it. But please realise that it will be telling you stuff that's very different to what we're saying on this group. And I was a bit frustrated. Panna.
Sorry, I just wanted to interrupt you by saying, if you do need one of the women to women, we've got two administrators here today, Saroj and Sadhna. So they are aware that I'm not going to be sitting around. So if you do need them, they are there. I am behind the screen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Panna.
Thanks.
But yeah, so everybody's got a choice what they do, but Daksha and I were getting worried that the messages going through the WhatsApp group were going to start to confuse people terribly. What we are advising has got really good scientific backing. It's not dangerous. It's not woo-woo. It's how indeed, when I first started nursing nearly 50 years ago, it's how we treated diabetics. What's happened since is the pharmaceutical industry and the food industry have grown and grown and grown. Unfortunately, the medical world has been hijacked into a very medical model. And what we are advocating is a much more natural approach to nutrition in line with how the body is meant to operate. So with that little taster, if you like, I'm going to share my screen. I hope this will work. Yes, it will. And just very quickly go through the very rudimentary basics of why we believe that low carb is the best way to deal with diabetes. So hopefully you can all see that. I'll go into slideshow. So as I always mention, you know, if you are going to make fundamental changes to your lifestyle and particularly your diet, and you are taking medication for diabetes or indeed blood pressure, you need to let your GP know and keep them monitoring you, because it may be, if all goes well and you do stick to these changes in your diet, that you may be able to reduce or even come off some of the medication. So it's important they're keeping an eye on you. It's not because what we're advocating is dangerous, it's just because hopefully things will improve and you can come off your medication. So do keep in touch with them and let them know what you're doing. But just to remind you that type 2 diabetes occurs when the individual has become insulin resistant. Insulin is the hormone that is released by the pancreas when we get a lot of glucose going into our bloodstream from the gut, i.e., once we've eaten food that contains glucose, it's been broken down, it's absorbed into the bloodstream, and when it reaches a certain level, we need to get it out of the blood, because sugar in the blood is actually quite dangerous to our body. We're only meant to have small amounts of it to help the body function. So insulin is the hormone that nature provided us with that gets released, and it opens the cells up to allow the sugar to come out of the blood into the muscle tissues and other vital areas where it's needed, but it's only needed in small amounts. When we're constantly challenging the body with lots and lots of sugar, the body gets less sensitive to the insulin, and so it stops working as efficiently, and the blood glucose starts to rise, and so the pancreas gets a bit desperate and starts producing more insulin. And this goes on for many, many years, where the insulin levels are constantly rising because it's not doing the job it's meant to do, and it's desperately trying to. So it thinks if there's more of it, it'll help. And over time, that rising level of insulin, as well as the rising levels in glucose, is really bad for all the body systems. But you can continue to have a normal blood glucose for quite a few years while having this gradually rising insulin level. And therefore, people who are led into a false sense of security because the doctor checks their blood sugar and it's okay, but if they're eating the wrong diet, the harm could still be happening because their insulin levels going up. So they reckon that it's probably maybe up to 10 years of this cycle happening before the blood glucose will actually raise an alert. And of course, it can only be discovered if somebody goes to the doctor and they check their blood sugar. But the sort of negative things can have been happening for years and years and years before it's noticed. This is why changing your diet, even if you aren't yet diabetic, is so important. And the reason why this is all bad is that when we have an excess of sugar, we're only meant to have around a teaspoon of sugar circulating in our blood at any one time. So if we're consuming large amounts, the body is naturally designed to turn sugar into fat. And the first place that this fat goes to is the liver. So the liver becomes really, really fatty, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is the most significant cause of liver failure in the Western world today. You used to get liver damage purely down to people overdoing alcohol or drugs. And now alcoholic and drug-induced liver disease is knocked into the shade by non-alcoholic fatty liver disease caused by poor diet. And when the liver's got pretty full up of fat, the pancreas, which is a little organ that sits sort of just below the stomach and is joined to the gut, it also fills up with fat. And the pancreas is where the cells are that produce insulin. So not only have we started to become insulin resistant because we're eating all this sugar and it's causing insulin levels to rise and insulin resistance to occur, but we get to a point then when our pancreas is damaged by all this fat that's being produced, and it itself can't then produce much insulin. So we get a kind of double whammy. So it's really important that we understand that an excess of carbohydrate is incredibly harmful to the body. And it's the excess of carbohydrate that makes us fat, not an excess of fat. And that is a very, very poorly understood concept, even in the medical world, let alone amongst the general population. So if people are developing type 2 diabetes, and we can now with blood tests note people who are not yet diabetic, but whose blood sugar is rising, not yet to the level that qualifies them as diabetic, but what we call pre-diabetic. So it's wonderful if you discovered at that point, because you can stop yourself ever becoming diabetic. But if the problem with people who have become type 2 diabetic is because they've been eating too much sugar, then if we stop eating the sugar, we really do help the problem. And if we get it right, we can even reverse the situation. We can help that fat to get used up from the liver and pancreas to allow those organs to start functioning more efficiently again, and to allow the body to have just enough sugar to cope with, and therefore the insulin resistance becomes less of an issue and can eventually settle down. A person will always have a tendency to become diabetic if they let their diet get out of control again. But as long as they manage their carbohydrates, they will not be living with all the repercussions of diabetes. An important thing I want to say here is that the medical model at the moment is when people are diagnosed with diabetes, they may get a little bit of dietary advice, but it's not usually that great. And what they're usually offered are drugs. And those drugs will artificially control their blood sugar. But way back, even in the 1970s, we knew that if you just artificially control the blood sugar with drugs, but you didn't address the diet, you would still get all the long-term side effects of diabetes. So but controlling diabetes with drugs is not the ideal solution. It's obvious to me that if somebody was diagnosed as celiac disease, or somebody has a severe intolerance to a certain food, you simply would not give them that food. Celiacs can't take gluten, so you don't give a celiac gluten. I just don't understand why the medical world thinks it's okay to give people who have clearly demonstrated by their physiology that they're not handling sugar, why they continue to give them sugar. So it just is common sense that if the problem is caused by too much sugar, stop putting the sugar in and you haven't got a problem, or you'll help the problem greatly. And the important thing here is when I talk about sugar, I'm not just talking about the white stuff on the teaspoon that you might add to your tea. I am talking about absolutely every kind of food that gets broken down to sugar by your body. And that is basically all carbohydrates. You will get carbohydrates quite naturally through some vegetables and fruit. There is absolutely no need to be eating carbohydrate in any other form. And even fruit needs to be very, very carefully consumed, because it's quite high in natural sugar. And again, we aren't meant to eat as much fruit as we do in a modern diet. Fruit was provided seasonally by nature to help us to lay down fat stores to see us through a period of poor food supply. For instance, in the UK, in this part of the globe where we have our very clear seasons, in the autumn we get a lot of autumn fruit, and we're meant to gorge on that, lay down fat, because when we go through the winter, an awful lot of the produce that we try to grow in this country isn't available, and therefore food supplies could be very poor, and we've got body fat on which we can survive until we get more plentiful food again. And that's the natural way that we're meant to deal with fruit. We're not meant to have it day in, day out. And we're certainly not meant to have the uber sweet fruit that has been bred over the last few decades in order to entice us to buy it and eat more of it. So please just understand that every single carbohydrate will be broken down to sugar Here you can see the molecules. You've got simple monosaccharides, you've got disaccharides, which are 2 molecules of sugar together, and then you've got polysaccharides, which are most of the starchy types of carbs, which have got lots of molecules of sugar joined together. And in your stomach and your gut, they all get broken down to sugar and get absorbed into the bloodstream as sugar. Carbohydrates are not essential to life. You will not die if you do not eat carbohydrates. If you don't have protein or fat, you will come to grief and potentially die. Fat is a naturally occurring fat, not artificially, industrially produced fats, but naturally occurring fat, be it fats that come from some of the plants, such as avocados and coconuts and so forth, or all the animal-based fats. They contain very important fat-soluble vitamins and minerals that are vital to life. And protein are the building blocks of life. We need protein in order to grow and maintain the body. So children clearly need lots of it to grow. And once we're adults, we need protein to carry on maintaining our body mass and maintaining all our vital functions. We absolutely do not need carbohydrates because we can synthesize energy from fat and protein. And we are designed to use fat as our principal source of energy. We are not designed to use carbohydrates solely as our source of energy. But the problem is, in modern diets, we eat so much carbohydrate, it gives us more energy than we need. So we never process our body fat. And indeed, the carbohydrate that's eaten in excess gets turned into more body fat, as well as fat in our liver. So we're on this sort of cycle of just constantly overfeeding ourselves, but not with good nutrients. Carbohydrates contain very, very few nutrients. So we get any nutrients that may be contained in carbohydrates, we can get from other sources of fat and protein. Nature never puts together carbohydrate and fat, or very rarely does. Avocados are one of the exceptions, but there are very, very few naturally occurring foods that contain carbohydrate and fat together. The food industry has discovered that that combination is really tasty and really moreish, and therefore an awful lot of processed foods contain both carbohydrate and fat. And the problem is the fat that they often contain is the industrialized fat. It's not good, healthy fat. So all processed foods tend to be very detrimental to the body. So all these carbohydrate sources here, no matter how healthy you might think they're supposed to be, they simply aren't. They're carbohydrates, they get broken down to sugar, and they will do us no good at all. And fructose, I was a bit alarmed to see a post on the WhatsApp group the other day from some so-called nutritionist in India. She may be the highest paid nutritionist in India, but she doesn't know an awful lot about nutrition because she seemed to think that fructose was wonderful. And fructose is the most toxic of all of the glucose molecules. So how she can possibly say that fructose is okay, I do not know. But the industry are very clever. And when they process food, they often add hidden sugars, and they have this list of different names that they can use on labels to kind of con you into not realizing that these things are just simply sugar. And again, trying to sort of help you to understand, and I'm sure for most of you, you do it anyway, but calories in, calories out is a very, very unhelpful way of looking at what you're eating. What we want to think about when we're eating is this nutrient dense? Is this food actually going to nourish my body and give me energy, the kind of energy that I can use, and it isn't going to be detrimental to my body? And here you've got two different dishes with roughly the same calories. The donut's 279, the curry's 262, but they're roughly the same calories. The curry is giving you half the amount of carbs that the donut is, but it's also giving you loads of nutrition. You've got much more protein. You've got 18 grams of what will be healthy fats, as opposed to 13 grams of probably processed industrialized fats in the donut, combined with all those carbs. And only 1 gram of fiber in the donut, whereas you've got 6 grams of fiber in the curry. So real food is what we're advocating, not artificially created food, and food that is much more leaning towards protein and natural fat as opposed to carbohydrates. And this is particularly important if you have a diabetes or know you're at risk of diabetes. And again, I've shown these before, but for anybody that's relatively new to the group, these are some graphics, and we have copiously put the links on, but we can do so again on the WhatsApp group. The links to these on the Public Health Collaboration website. Dr. David Unwin, who's a GP who's reversed diabetes in over 100 of his patients now, decided that these were quite a useful way to try and help people to understand that many of the foods they were eating were just loaded with sugar. And I think this one is particularly startling because you've got things like Cocoa Pops and cornflakes, even porridge. They're all very small, very modest helpings of these foods, and yet look at the number of teaspoons of sugar that are in those. Now, if you had a bowl of cereal, a slice of toast, and a glass of fruit juice for your breakfast, you have had more sugar in the day than you're probably supposed to have all week in that one meal. So it's really important to understand how food gets broken down and how it's utilized by the body, and the fact that there's no nutrition in that. There may be a tiny bit of fiber in the bran flakes and the oat porridge, but you can get your fiber much more healthily from good vegetables and much healthier foods. So these graphics are really, really helpful, and so they're freely available. Rice, which I know can be a staple for a lot of people, is just starch. It's just pure starch. There's absolutely no benefit either in having these things cold. I think there was a bit of a thing going around that if you ate these after they'd been refrigerated, they became resistant and therefore less detrimental to the body. That's simply not true. They still get broken down by the body. They still produce all the sugar that's contained within them, which goes into your bloodstream. Look at the banana. You know, the equivalent of 6 teaspoons of sugar, and yet it's hailed so often as a healthy fruit. The sweeter the fruit, the more natural sugar there's going to be in there. And I'm afraid it doesn't matter whether it's come from a fruit or out of a sugar bowl. Sugar is sugar, and it's going to have the same effect on your body. Whereas good old broccoli and most green leafy vegetables will have virtually no carbohydrates in them. Root vegetables will always have a bit more carb than leafy vegetables because the root is there to sustain the plant, and therefore it contains natural carbohydrates. So we like people to have a good balance with more leafy vegetable and less root vegetable if possible. And again, there are charts that will help you to work out which vegetables are the least carby, but all fruits on the whole are pretty high in fruit sugar, but the small berries, the strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, all the things that come into season in the late summer in the UK, they are all quite good fruits to eat because the ratio of fiber to sugar is quite equal, and therefore the fiber helps to reduce the amount of sugar that's absorbed. But again, we shouldn't be eating huge quantities of them. But if you want to have fruit, and British apples that are still quite tart will be pretty good to eat as well. The problem is the growers, knowing that people like sweet stuff, have tended to make apples sweeter and sweeter with every generation. And I think if many of us ate the apples that were around when we were kids, we'd probably think they were horrible now because they will be so much more bitter than the modern fruit is. So fruit, unfortunately, has been interfered with, and not to our good. So I know many of you are vegetarian, but if you're vegetarian rather than vegan, then one of the places that you will get your really good protein from is the dairy foods, but always go for full fat. Having decent naturally occurring fat with a meal that does contain carbohydrates does help to minimize the absorption and better utilize the sugar from the foods. So it's a complete, again, myth that low fat everything is best. We should have full fat dairy, best quality that we can afford. Eggs are a really, really useful protein food for vegetarians, but again, try and get the best quality that you can. So free range or organic rather than battery hens. And then all vegetables that grow above the ground, small amounts of the root vegetables, naturally occurring fats and oils. So cold pressed oils such as olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil, or if you do eat dairy, then ghee is a great fat to cook with. If you eat meat, then the animal fats such as lard and beef fat, beef dripping, are great fats to cook with. And why on earth we kind of had this idea that something that came out of a factory was healthier than something that nature produced, I'll never know. But don't be frightened of naturally occurring fats, and stay well away from vegetable oils and any kind of refined oil, because the processing that goes on makes those very inflammatory and very harmful to the body. Nuts and pulses are also good sources of protein for vegetarians, but you need to be aware that they are variable in how much carbs they contain. Nuts, there's a whole range of nuts that are low carb, right through to nuts that are much higher in carb. Walnuts, almonds, hazelnuts, macadamia nuts, they're all good ones on the lower carb end of the scale. And pulses, again, they're a good source of protein, but they can be quite carby. So it all depends what you're trying to achieve. But beware of the really sweet tropical fruits, because they are basically nature's candy. So avoid all processed foods if at all possible. If it's been made in a factory, it's not designed for your body to cope with. Check the ingredients list. If there's more than 5, and particularly if any of the words on the packet require a dictionary to understand what they are, and stay away from them. You'll see sugar in nearly all processed foods, and if it's one of the first 3 ingredients, then really stay well away from it. I'd stay away from it anyway, but if it's in the first 3 ingredients, that means there's quite a significant amount of sugar in there. And it's in a lot of savouries as well as sweet processed foods. Vegetable oils, as I've said, are very bad for us because they are highly inflammatory. Any flour products that are made from wheat are going to be really starchy, and obviously rice and grains are very starchy as well. And I appreciate that they can be the mainstay of a lot of vegetarian diets, and it's about trying to be creative and use other vegetables to take the place of rice and grains. And many of us have successfully managed to do that. It can be done, but it just requires thinking about and managing the quantities for people, particularly from Asian cultures where rice can be a mainstay. It may be that it's very, very difficult to avoid it altogether, but it's thinking about quantities and having it as a very small portion and having other vegetables as the greater part of the meal. It's just being aware that it's really not good for you. And it's not good for us because the grains that are around today have been refined and refined and refined. So they're nowhere near as pure and as hard for our bodies to digest as they might have been 50 years ago, which means that all the starch that's in there gets absorbed by our bodies, whereas 50, 60 years ago, the grains were quite different, and therefore we didn't absorb as much of the starch. There are some good proteins that can be found from soy-based products. You need to be careful with soy-based products and look at them, get the best quality you can, because again, some of those are very industrialized. But tofu and tempeh can be quite useful sources of protein for people who don't eat meats and animal products. And obviously the fats, as I said, avocado oil, olive oil, coconut oil, these are all great forms of fat, and the nuts and so forth are useful for vegetarians. So focus on meals that consist of natural, nutrient-dense foods. Try to avoid snacking. If you're having really good quality meals, you should not need to snack. It's the food industry that's convinced us that we need a morning biscuit and an afternoon snack and a bedtime treat. We don't need those things. If we're eating proper, nutrient-dense main meals, we should not need to snack. Avoid processed foods and forget about calories. Think about quality of the food that's on the plate. And as I say, if there's more than 5 ingredients on a label, it's probably best not to eat it. Real food doesn't need a label. So other than possibly a use-by date, which is another modern phenomenon. So please be thoughtful about what you eat. That is all I was going to say. I apologize, but I felt it needed to just go back to basics and explain why we feel so passionately about real food and low carb. So I hope that's maybe got a few questions going from you all now.
Yes, there's one from Sadhana. She's asking, are any cereals good? No.
Short answer. But really and truly, breakfast is a meal that was invented by Mr. Kellogg. Breakfast just means breaking fast. So you can eat what you like in the morning, but cereals are just carbohydrates. And unfortunately, many modern cereals aren't just the original corn or whatever. They've had all sorts of other stuff added to them. So they really aren't good for you at all. And if something has to be fortified with vitamins, it does ask the question, well, why was that original food any good? So no, I would stay away. Now, Dax and I have got some recipes, and again, we have shared them on the WhatsApp in the past for low carb granolas that are made with nuts and seeds and spices that can be really nice to add into a bit of natural yogurt. If you don't like eggs, or you don't want to have eggs for breakfast, they are a very, very useful breakfast food because you can prepare them very quickly and they're so nutrient dense. But if you don't want to be bothering with eggs in the morning, then good full fat yogurt, Greek style full fat yogurt with some berries or some homemade granola makes for a very quick and easy breakfast. That's much better for you than cereal.
Yeah, and if you haven't got time for granola, you can just sprinkle some toasted seeds on and some crushed almonds. Yeah, you know, the back of a knife.
Easy, you know, while you're cooking the tea one day, to put some nuts in a dry frying pan and you know, just keep shaking it over the heat for a few minutes and toast them, and then put them in an airtight container. And you can do the same with seeds like sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds and so forth. And then you've got something just to sprinkle on some yogurt to make it a bit more interesting.
Yeah, just gives it the different textures.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be complicated.
No.
And then Rishi said, is this why I feel, so I think, you know, when you're talking about the porridge and everything and the cereal, so just put, is this why I feel very hungry after eating porridge, almost dizzy a few hours after eating? I have to binge on something to perk me up.
Yeah. Stop eating the porridge. Yeah, I mean, what's probably happening there, and it's quite interesting, and again, it breaks my heart that diabetics aren't taught these days to monitor their blood glucose as much as they should, because we're all quite different, and some people can eat porridge and it doesn't really affect their blood sugar very much at all. Other people, they eat it and it sends a great big spike of sugar into their bloodstream, and the body will respond to that by pouring out the insulin. The insulin, if you're still sort of relatively insulin sensitive, will drop that blood sugar very quickly, and therefore you're immediately hungry again, because that's what's happening, this sort of roller coaster of a spike in blood sugar, then it drops, and that's what causes this hunger cycle and this sort of hangry feeling that, you know, I've got to eat. If you have a good protein and fat based meal, you don't get that spike. It takes longer for the stomach to do its job and for the body to break down that food, and therefore all the signals that are sent to your brain to tell you you're hungry don't happen anything like as quickly, because the process is taking much longer and the body recognizes it's being nourished. Because if you just have a feast of carbs, your body is very clever. It knows this isn't what it needs. So it's not getting the nourishment it requires to do its job, whether that's repairing or just maintaining your body. And therefore it starts shouting very quickly, I need food. And the problem is, if you just keep giving it more carbs, it keeps saying, no, I'm not nourished yet, I need more. So it's really important that we're nourishing our body with our food. And that's why we're supposed to eat. I know in modern life, eating has become a very pleasurable thing. And I think it's a great thing if you have social encounters when you're eating. So with family get together, or you meet a friend for lunch. But the bottom line is, we eat because our body needs nourishment. And if all we're doing is feeding our pleasure senses, but not nourishing our body, we have to keep doing it. And that's what drives this cycle of eating. So we need to get back to thinking about our food as the fuel for our body. But you wouldn't put diesel in a petrol engine, and we really shouldn't be putting carbs in our fat and protein designed engines.
Another question from Urvashi, kind of question. Your advice regarding protein drinks, please.
Right. Well, I presume by that you're kind of talking about shakes that people sometimes use for weight loss. And there is a particular diabetic program that's been taken up by some NHS authorities that uses shakes just as a shortcut, really, for helping people to keep to a low calorie, low carb diet for a few weeks. We don't really feel that they should be used unless it's a desperate situation, because what you should be doing is eating your protein, having protein dense meals, and therefore you shouldn't need to drink your protein. If you're vegan and you really are struggling to get adequate protein, and not getting adequate protein is another driver of appetite, because as I say, your body knows what it needs, and if it's not getting enough protein, it wants you to keep eating. And I know vegans can struggle with protein. So I haven't got advice on what's the best, because obviously if you're vegan, you couldn't have whey protein. You'd need to use something like pea protein or hemp seed protein or something. You can get those ground down to powders. But we'd much rather you put together meals that contain adequate protein. So I couldn't advise you on the best protein drinks, because I don't believe they should be necessary. I don't know that actually you've got any other.
No, same. I believe, eat your food.
Any protein, yeah. Food. See that she's come up with what protein food is good to stop feeling hunger. Well, any protein. I mean, again, could you tell us whether you're vegetarian, vegan, or whether you eat meat? Is it Rashmi?
Yeah.
You're vegetarian, but do you eat eggs and dairy?
Probably dairy.
Because eggs are fantastic, and there's absolutely no rule about how many eggs a day you can have. There is no link with egg yolks and diet and cholesterol, blood cholesterol. No eggs, oh dear, right. So
yeah.
For anybody else that does eat eggs are great, and they don't cause your cholesterol to go up. There's a whole different thing, and I did talk about cholesterol last month. Dairy, so the full fat yogurts and cheese, those would be good protein that should help to satisfy you for longer. And then tofu, tempeh, they're also good sources. And then nuts, go for the lower carb nuts. Somebody's asking if I could create a list. All of this information is readily available on numerous websites. So please use the internet, but use it sensibly. Diet Doctor, which we're constantly putting links to, has got a lot of this, a lot of lists of good foods for vegetarians, vegans, etc. So just go onto the internet and have a look yourself.
Yeah. I was just going to add, sometimes it will give it per 100 grams. So you can easily compare, 100 grams of, I don't know, tur dal compared to mung dal, compared to some chickpeas. It's very easy to do. And it's important that you empower yourselves to do your own research, because we're obviously not always there. So you might find yourself in a situation where you need to make a decision on your own. Yeah. So it's good to have those skills.
And if you Google any food, what is the nutrient value of, then you'll usually find a nice little chart that tells you. Just make sure you note how much they're saying, because sometimes it's a cup, and I think American cups are equivalent to about 8 ounces, which is about half a pint. But often there'll be 100 per 100 grams. and then you can work out what the protein, the fibre, the carbohydrate, etc. of that food is. Pulses and lentils are not the same as protein and meats. That you will need a much greater quantity of all vegetarian sources to get the same amount of protein, which is one of the reasons why we like eggs for people who do eat eggs, because they're a good protein source, whereas for nuts and pulses, you've got to eat a lot more, and the problem is they come with carbs. So it all depends. If you're not diabetic, then you can afford to go a bit more into the carbs with the combination of protein and carbs. But if you're diabetic, you've got to be really careful and try and go for the lowest carb nuts, etc., that you can. When we talk about low carb, we really are talking about under 100 grams a day, preferably nearer 50 grams a day. And that's quite hard to achieve if you are relying on vegetable sources of protein. So for vegetarians, I would say it's quite hard to get much under 100, but if you can, it will still make a difference.
It will. Any more questions, anybody?
Yeah. There must be some there. Feel free if you want to
Unmute even.
Unmute and ask a question.
Also, I was wondering if anyone in the groups ever experienced wearing a continuous glucose monitor, and if they'd like to share their experience with the rest of the group.
Our views on the NHS No Diabetes website. That's, pardon the pun, but I don't know that one. I'll just have a quick look. Well,
yeah, so while Carolyn's looking at that, I was just wondering, has anyone tried a continuous glucose monitor? No. No? Anybody heard of it?
maybe could, how can we ask people to let us know? Could you just put yes into the chat box if you are actually diabetic or been warned that you're pre-diabetic?
Yeah, so if you're pre-diabetic or diabetic, just put a Y in the chat box so we get an idea of how many people on this call are diabetic or pre-diabetic.
Right, looks like no diabetes is particular to part of London, and I've not come across it. It's being very slow here, so it's...
Right, so there's a lot of people who are saying yes to either diabetes or pre-diabetes, but also there's some people telling us that because it's an auspicious day for us as Gujaratis, Hindus, they do this special way of eating today, which I assume is quite high carb. What do other people say? Do you think
So
do
what
you
sort
all
of...
think it's high carb? What are you eating today? You know.
Yeah, could you give us an idea what kind of things you're eating today?
Somebody
Can I say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Today, most of it is all nothing but carbs. Potatoes, which is full of starch, carbs, and
Cassava.
then torpicchia, which is full of starch.
Yeah.
And peanuts to balance it up a little bit, and yogurt.
And why is that particularly the food that you eat today?
It is Lord Shiva's birthday today, and they do the fasting by eating just no grains and just potatoes, and as I said, fruits and milk and nuts.
And cassava. Caroline, remember we said before with Panna that when we fast, we eat all like potato, starchy foods, carbohydrates?
Yeah.
And this is it. Either it's fried or boiled or, steamed or whatever, tossed in oil, made into a curry. But it's just.
Is it some sort of tradition that is there an explanation for why that's what you eat?
No, that's the food eaten on a fasting, but it's eaten in so much quantity. You wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't eat it in normal day. But on a fasting day, you eat so much of it, so much.
Carolyn,
when you say you're fasting, do you go for a period without eating?
No, on that fast day, you can eat this.
So you're not really fasting then?
No, but it is like a fast, but not eating grains.
It's not like a fast. Sorry,
I
don't want to fall out over this, but this is definitely not fasting. This is,
can I say,
eating in a particular way.
I just eat once a day. I don't eat binge or eat anything. Just have this meal once a day, and that's all.
Yeah, which probably, but that you are making it hard for yourself to only have that one meal, because if you're eating, do you eat that early in the day or
mid-afternoon, 4 or 5?
Yeah. Because if you eat that and then try and go with nothing for the rest of the day, you're really making it hard on yourself, because your body's going to be screaming.
Yeah.
But I would just say this is the most unhealthy approach to fasting.
This is just once a year.
Yeah, I mean, that's great if it is just once a year, but if you're diabetic, it's the last thing you should be doing. You are really challenging your body with an awful lot of stuff that there is no easy way to say this other than it's toxic, it's poison. It's really bad for your body. And if you've got yourself well controlled, and then you give yourself a sort of load of that, it's really going to be hard on your system.
The thing is, it's not really necessary to eat all this.
No.
Do well, we can just have milk, yogurt.
Yeah.
I would try
milk, yogurt, and
seasonal fruit.
Yeah, and some nuts.
You really don't need to have.
Yeah.
And I think
we don't need, and eating is a different thing. Yeah. Have you seen on the group, the food group, how much people have cooked? Not one dish, but 5 dishes. No. And they eat.
Sorry, as Carolyn says, I don't want to fall out over this, but the bottom line is, I think, because today is a religious occasion. It is also a festival. It's a lot of things rolled into one. So it's a happy time as well. And people get together, and this is how they celebrate at the end after the prayers are done and everything. But we could moderate it if we want. There's no rule to say we should. It
sounds a bit like our Christmas, when we go nuts and have the most ridiculous amount, particularly of sweet food. And those of us that are trying to keep ourselves healthy with a low carb way of life have had to learn how to adapt and have, not be killjoys, not join in with the festival and the celebrations, etc., but to find foods that we can have that are still a treat, but are much more in keeping with the way that we should be eating. And I think the problem in modern times is we've got so much food. And it's so when a lot of these perhaps religious festivals first came about, people they weren't overfed. And therefore you could have these massive celebrations and it wasn't doing a whole heap of harm because they weren't overfed the rest of the time. Most of us are overeating on a daily basis now. And when we then go into a festival like this and suddenly have another load of foods that we really shouldn't be eating, we're just adding insult to insult. So it's about still having the celebration, still observing the religious side of it, and, perhaps depriving yourself of some of the things you have day to day, but trying to make sure you're not harming yourself with the food you are eating on that festival day. Because that list, if you're diabetic, is just awful.
But today is a double whammy, because if we don't have that, we'd probably have the pancakes.
Yeah, I know. Yes, don't talk to me about pancakes.
No, we won't. Sorry.
There are low carb options for those as well. And that's what it's about. You know, if you've got diabetes, unfortunately, it doesn't go away on that feast day. So, or fast day. It sounded like a feast day to me, but fast day, it doesn't go away that day. So it's about trying to adapt to have something that means you can still join in, but it's not going to be really detrimental to your health. So I think, you know, wind back perhaps and think about, why are we having this? What's the point of today? And if it's to maybe, as I say, deprive yourself of something, like we're, you know, in the Christian faith, just going into Lent now. And the whole idea is to give up something that you really like. So you are depriving yourself for these next 40 days. I suppose it's that easy to give up something you don't like. So, well, I won't have that for the next 6 weeks. That's not the original aim of it. So maybe pull back a little bit. What's this day all about? And what can I deprive myself of, but that it isn't going, you know, and what can I eat instead that isn't going to harm me? I hope that makes some kind of sense to you all.
Caroline,
Yeah.
can I ask a question?
Hang on, yeah. Sorry.
Ask a question, like
Sadhana, go on then.
yeah. It's just about myself. I've been diagnosed pre-diabetes, and I do once a year after Christmas. Every year I do my routine blood test, and I've been like since maybe last 10 years. Is same pre-diabetic. I think maybe, I don't know, I'm just walking every day and trying eating low sugar. When I did fast, our Jain fast, only water, and it all went down so much, but then you can't be on only water forever.
No.
So then, when I start my diet, so this is my case. Since many years, I'm pre-diabetic.
Well, it's good that you haven't gone into diabetes. So you're obviously, you know, doing something that's good, but obviously it'd be nice if you got back into the non-pre-diabetic range.
Yeah.
I don't know whether what I've said tonight helps at all, but it's really looking at what you're eating and why you're eating. And I think the sad fact is most of us can do with an awful lot less food than we are currently eating. Food is so readily available to us, and portion sizes have got much bigger. If we look back at the plates that our grannies had and the way we ate, well, certainly I'm in my 60s now. When I was a child, you know, we just didn't have the snacks and all the extra food. It literally was just 3 meals a day. So I think we really have to have an honest look at what we're eating and get the main meals right. And it's the protein and the healthy fats that will keep you full and that will nourish your body. And hopefully then, you know, you'll get onto an even keel. And don't think of it as a diet. This is for life. This is not any kind of a quick fix. Okay.
Can I add a little bit?
Yeah.
I would say at our age, 2 meals a day is sufficient. We don't need to eat more than that.
Absolutely. I only eat 2 meals a day. I think it's
same here.
It's something that you can easily get into once you've got yourself into a reasonably low carb situation. It's hard to go if you're somebody that eats a lot of carbs and perhaps has a few snacks. You can't just suddenly start eating 2 meals a day. What I always advise people to do is concentrate on the 3 meals a day being healthy meals so that they don't need the snacks, and then start thinking about having your first meal of the day later and later and later until eventually you find you're just having maybe a midday meal and then your evening meal. And many, many people do that now. And if there's adequate nutrients in those 2 meals, that's all you need. Again, there's no rule book that says you have to have 3 meals a day. That's a modern thing. In fact, many kids, I know my father grew up, he's 99 in a couple of weeks' time. He grew up on a farm, very poor. I mean, it wasn't really a farm, it was like a little croft. 8 children. They went to school with no breakfast. They had no school dinners. They had a really good home cooked meal in the evenings, and they all lived to be over 80. 4 of them out of the 8 have lived to be into their 90s, and my dad's heading into his 100th year. You know, so we've got food completely out of proportion in modern life, and we're eating stuff that we were never ever meant to eat, and we're eating far, far too much. And that's the bottom line. So I think it's about, I don't want to sort of be a killjoy. Somebody's put on here, I know you've got to enjoy life, and of course you have, but food has become far too much of the important thing. The socializing that goes with having family meals or meals with friends is great, but the food shouldn't be the bigger part. You know, the getting around the table and enjoying each other's company is the important part, but not feasting. And we're all doing it now. We're all, you know, the supermarkets at Christmas are just crazy. You'd think, you know, we weren't going to be able to get to a shop again for a year the way people shop at Christmas, and that's just the way modern life has gone. It's kind of got us into this feeding frenzy, and we kind of need to pull back and realize why we eat and focus on those two really important nutrients, which is the protein and the healthy fats. And then most of us, if we can do that consistently, we'll find our health will benefit hugely.
Caroline, proteins have carbohydrates as well.
No,
No?
vegetable sources of protein do, but animal sources don't. There's virtually
No.
zero carbs in animal sources of protein.
No, we are vegetarians, so we eat the pulses, yeah?
So that's what I said that earlier, that you have to be careful with the balance. So you need to get enough protein, but you don't need to go overboard on the carby versions. So with nuts, try and choose the nuts that are at the lower end of the carbohydrate spectrum, and with pulses, just enough to give you that bit of protein, but not too many, or they will push your carbs up. It is hard, and I make no secret of it. It is hard as a vegetarian to get really low carb, but you can still keep it lower by certainly missing out the obvious starch, all the wheat-based flours, rice. I mean, you can make really nice accompaniments for curries using cauliflower and broccoli, rice, and you know, I prepare it, and I know Daxa does, with just a little bit of homemade stock and some onions and lots of spices, and just sweat it for about 5 minutes if you've put it into your processor and got it in a nice sort of rice-like consistency. It's very quick to do and makes a great accompaniment for a nice curry. You do not have to have that starchy rice. So it's just about rethinking what we put on our plate and getting the important protein there, which may come with some carbs. So if it does, because it's the likes of pulses or chickpeas or something, then please keep everything else that goes with that dish as low carb as you can.
Yeah, it's a very good point.
So balancing, balancing your.
It's balancing,
food.
yes.
Yeah.
And you know, people are very keen on saying everything in moderation, but if you're diabetic, you can't afford to do carbs in moderation. You've got to keep the carbs low.
Yeah.
And as I say, it's really important to understand that even if your blood sugar has been kept reasonably steady by drugs, you can still be having some of the side effects of that constant high blood sugar that the drugs are having to fight against. So if you can keep your blood sugar low by not consuming too much, then that's much better for you.
I have tried your cauliflower rice, Dakshana. That was quite good, I have to say.
Good.
Yeah, you have to, it takes a
Getting
little while.
used to it, yeah.
It takes a little while to sort of get it just how you like it. But don't be afraid to use broccoli as well. I often do a mixture of broccoli and cauliflower. And the other thing that's delicious, I don't know how many of you have tried it, is roasted cauliflower and roasted broccoli. They are absolutely gorgeous. And again, I do a load of that and stick it on with whatever I'm doing, whether it's a curry or a bolognese or whatever. And I don't miss the pasta or the rice because the cauliflower is so tasty. And again, it's kind of just in our heads that you have to have these things together, but you don't. There's no rule book. So, you know, we need to do what's best for us, for our bodies.
Bakrania has asked what you would suggest for days that they fast, like today. And I was wondering if we could ask her for some suggestions of what she thinks she could have instead, having heard your talk today. What do you think, Caroline?
Yeah.
You want to come on and just sort of give your ideas? Because obviously we can suggest things, but you know what you like. So
yeah, I mean, so like Caroline said, we could do like plant protein, things like that would be a great idea. But I was thinking, because like when we fast, we usually try and have more carbs like potatoes and all that. So because I missed a little bit to start with, so as well.
okay.
So did you think the potatoes come just because people think, oh, that would be a good thing to eat when I'm not having
grains.
too much?
I think because it's filling.
Yeah, but the trouble is a potato is really starchy. So it's going to give you quite an insulin spike as well, or a sugar spike that will create an insulin. Yeah. So with that knowledge, maybe it would help you to pick on something that's a bit less carby, because you know we do encourage people to fast now as part of a healthy lifestyle, and maybe go from, you know, an evening meal one day to an evening meal the next day, which is a bit like people do in Ramadan, to be honest. Is, you know, they go from you know, throughout the day with nothing to eat. And if you are going to fast, then the best thing you can do is have a really good high fat protein meal, because that's going to sustain your body and make you much less likely to feel really, really hungry during the following day when you're only having water or black tea or whatever to drink. So I would recommend the same. If you want to have a day of deprivation, if you like, where you're not going to eat too much, then it should be protein and fat you have before you go into that fast, than something starchy like potatoes.
Can I just ask, not ask, say, you know, this fasting we're talking about, like, for example, today, it's just one day. So if just for this one day, we just had, like I said earlier, yogurt, milk, berries, it is really one day. So could we not just do that? Because I think
absolutely.
that's the idea.
The yogurt and that sort of thing, that's fine. It's the other starchy things that were mentioned earlier that
so what I'm saying is we don't really need to have those, because really, if we are fasting, we should technically not be eating any of these.
If it's just one day and you can actually eat something, then eating what you're suggesting is perfect. But if it's a true fast where you're not eating at all, then you should try and prepare for that fast by having something really nourishing, and then again rewarding your body with something really nourishing at the end, rather than diving into the carbs, which are just going to give you a sudden rise in sugar. And then it's like, you know, the old joke when you go out for a Chinese meal and you want another meal an hour later because you've had this massive spike of sugar, and then suddenly you're starving again. So be kind to your body and reward it, you know, prepare it before with protein and fat, and then reward it with protein and fat at the end as well. But bombarding it with carbs is not kind at all. So you're
sorry, I just
yogurt and nuts and things. If you
just missed a little bit, Carolyn. So what you're suggesting is the day before, if you're going to say, if I wanted to fast today, then yesterday I should have just prepared for it.
Let the body sort of be well nourished, and then it's going to cope much better with that deprivation of food the following day. But I mean, if you are able to eat something, what you're suggesting is perfect. But if yogurt, berries, nuts, something like that.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline.
That's not going to torture your body in the way that starchy things will.
And I just wanted to add, if these foods that people are eating today or when they fast, I assume they're fried, and what kind of oils are you using to fry them? So, you know, it can be doubly detrimental.
Somebody here has mentioned that
mostly sunflower oil. Which is not good. Yes, I know.
Yes, exactly.
Chia seeds and flax seeds, brilliant. Both excellent. Good form of protein, and good high fiber and protein as well. So yeah, absolutely. Chia seeds and flax seeds are good. Somebody's talking about fasting for 30 days from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. and no intake of water either. I think that's a bit dodgy. I mean, I don't know why you're not allowed water. I'd certainly make sure you're really well hydrated the day before. So drink plenty when you are allowed to consume anything. And hopefully what I've just said about really having a nourishing protein and fat meal before and after the fast is how I prepare for that. It doesn't have to be huge, because the good thing about protein and fat is most of us can't eat huge quantities of fat, but it just needs to be something that's been cooked in a good quality fat, and that has got a decent amount of protein.
So, sorry, Caroline.
Fine, fire away.
Yeah. If we were to fast, and what would you suggest in the morning? Like an egg, an avocado?
Yeah, perfect.
With a little bit of salad, nothing
Yeah.
else?
Yeah, I mean, it's up to you whether you want to add in the salad, but the egg and the avocado are really good, rich
Should be enough
forms of protein and fat. So they would sustain you very well.
And then maybe have some chicken or something in the evening?
Yeah. Yeah, if you eat meat, then small amounts of meat with, again, the lower carb vegetables. That's when you could have your salad with the chicken.
Yes.
And maybe a nice dressing that's got a bit of oil in it that will give you that bit of extra fat.
Yeah, all right. The pomegranate dressing is quite nice.
Yeah.
But also, I think the potatoes, everybody's so used to eating potatoes, and we all love potatoes.
I know. I'm from Irish extraction, so I know potatoes, but they're just not great. In the days when in Ireland, because of course the potato famine, decimated Ireland, but they didn't eat anything else. That was their staple diet. And what was happening then was when they had their excess, they would be storing fat, which then got used when they didn't have much.
Yeah.
The problem is now we've got it all.
Every day.
The body can't handle it all.
Yeah.
But I know what it's like trying to deprive people of potatoes. My family, it's very hard to prize them off them.
That's right.
So, yeah, a little, if you're not diabetic, a small amount of potatoes, not the end of the world. But if you're trying to lose weight or you're diabetic, then potatoes are one of the things you have to try and limit significantly.
What about boiled rice? I know there'll be no nutrition in that then.
It's just starch.
It's the starch.
Just starch. So again, if you're not diabetic, a spoonful on a plate's not going to be the end of the world. Yeah, but if you are diabetic, it's an awful waste of your carb allowance, if you like, because it's doing nothing for your body.
What about pre-diabetic? Because I'm pre-diabetic, so.
Same.
We
want you to moderate your carbs, and therefore why waste your carbs on that? Have some lentils that at least got a bit more protein and stuff in them. But white rice is just starch. It's not really offering you anything much at all.
All right. What cottage cheese with toast, maybe?
Cottage cheese is very good. Cottage cheese is a good protein source. Again, go for the higher fat. I'm sick to death of seeing in the supermarkets low fat this, low fat that, zero fat, whatever. The sooner we can get over that, the better. So look for a cottage cheese that's got at least 4% fat in it, and that will sustain you. You've got protein and fat there, which again will be good.
Yes, unfortunately, the supermarkets are throwing a lot of low-fat foods rather than fat food now.
Yes.
It's difficult to buy full-fat food.
It's really driving us nuts because it's not doing us any good at all, this low fat. And in fact, as I say, there's good evidence to show that if you are having carbs and you're having some good quality fat with them, it does help to moderate the effect. Whereas when you're having high carb and low fat, the carbs are winning every time. And therefore, they're just increasing our body fat. Whereas we use fat. If we take in fat in the absence of carbs, we use that fat. But because it's easier to use carbs, if you have carbs and fat, you get your energy from the carbs, and the excess carbs get turned into fat, as well as the fat not being used. And it's lose-lose. Whereas if it's low carb and high fat, it's win-win.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you.
Just before I forget, I did look at this no thingy and no diabetes, which seems to be a London-based one. It does look like they're pro low carb. So if somebody's got the opportunity to look at that, then it looks like it's on our wavelengths. So I can't remember who asked about that, but
no, I can't.
There are a few more programs creeping in to the NHS. NICE, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, does make a reference to low carb as something that patients should be offered. So it is acknowledging that low carb works. It's just unfortunately the mainstream NHS doesn't push it. So we're not telling you about anything dodgy or dangerous at all, I promise. It's just that unfortunately the pharmaceutical and food industries have got a hold on a lot of people at the top, and low carb is not being kind of pushed in the way it should. So we're having to try and drive it from the ground up, but it really is the best way to get your diabetes under control or to prevent yourself becoming diabetic if you're on that road.
Tara's asking, what about quinoa? Is it too much carbs?
It is a bit. It's a grain. It's marginally better than rice, but not great, unfortunately.
Yeah, but if you could eat a lot less quinoa than you would eat rice, then maybe it's worth trying.
Yeah,
it's, you know, if it's not going to be as moreish.
Yeah, because I mean, quinoa is a good source of protein. So it's a bit like the lentils and the chickpeas and things. You've just got to be aware that it's not carb free. But if you're trying to build protein in as a vegetarian, it's another option. But you've got to watch how much you're having. It's not a free for all because it'll drive your carbs up if you overdo it.
What about couscous?
Same.
All right.
Well, that couscous is pretty carby.
Yeah, I was going to say it's worse.
It's worse.
Okay.
Yeah, quinoa would be better than couscous.
Because couscous is derived from wheat.
It is. I think it is.
Yeah, it's
a sort of Moroccan, Middle Eastern.
It's broken wheat. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah. So
wheat. Yeah.
Okay. You find
Caroline. We had somebody send this message. Pharmacies can refer obese people to the free weight loss courses run by NHS. Is that true? Have you heard anything about it?
I obviously all around the country, every area kind of is doing its own thing. And I know that some NHS trusts or community, primary care organisations are having contracts with the likes of Slimming World and Weight Watchers. And unfortunately, all of those just go down the calories in, calories out route. So they wouldn't be in line with what we're recommending. I know they're starting to encourage pharmacists to get involved with advising people about weight loss. But again, I don't know how they're being trained, what they're being taught. So there's a chance that they will just go down that same old route of calories in, calories out, and why they can't see it doesn't work when for 40 odd years we've been doing this and the obesity levels have just gone up and up and up. I don't know, but it's very variable. You've got the odd one, as I say, that no diabetes one looks like it's one that's on the right lines, but I couldn't tell you without knowing what organisation they're.
Have you retired or do you still work?
I've retired from nursing, but I'm almost full time again doing this now because we've got lots of GP practices, thankfully, and Thatcher and I are both based in South Manchester, and we've suddenly got a whole load of GPs that are asking us to go in and run low carb groups for them. So we're run off our feet at the moment. So I'm supposed to be retired, but life's getting busy again.
Caroline, GPs can refer a diabetic patient to one of your groups or any other groups run by their practice. They can refer them, can't they?
Well, it depends if there's a low carb group in the area.
Okay.
It's very, very variable, and it's been quite hard. Daksha's working with myself and another lady now, and it's taken us a couple of years to really get into the GP network, if you like, and luckily for us, we found some GPs who were willing to listen and liked what they saw. They looked at the likes of David Unwin's work, and there are quite a few GPs around the country now that are doing great things with low carb. So it's gradually getting better, but I couldn't tell you, off the top of my head where you are, if there is a group. GPs can refer people to all sorts of groups, but they're not all necessarily going, talking about low carb. Some of them are much more on the old fashioned, eat 50% of your plate with carbs and low fat and calories in, calories out.
Okay. Because most of us are Brent and Harrow.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of lot of people, Asian people, ethnic people.
I know.
So most of them are asking, there was a question about ethnic meal. How do you make a combination for a decent, low carb meal? How do you make it? That's what somebody asked, the lady asked in the questions. In the chat?
So a good low carb meal for a vegetarian would be trying to fill your plate with lots of leafy vegetables and keeping you need your protein. So you need probably some pulses or some, I don't know how many of you eat tofu, but you need something like that. I suppose if you eat paneer cheese, that's going to be a reasonable sort of staple in there, but it's trying to reduce the carbs as much as you can. So any of the carbs that don't have protein, such as the rice, should go. The chapatis, there are some quite good recipes. Again, we've put them on the WhatsApp group over the months for things that are the equivalent to chapatis, but you want to try and the deep fried stuff's the other thing you need to be very wary of. So fill your plate with the leafy veg, the protein element, but try and kick out the empty starches, as I would call them, the non-nutritious starches, such as the rice.
What about yogurt curry?
Well, but with yogurt curry, you mean you've put yogurt into the...
Do you mean curry?
Yeah, curry.
Yeah. So it's like it's got some gram flour in it to just thicken it, but it's not a lot of gram flour, Carolyn.
Yeah.
So you temper, you heat some ghee up, ideally. That's the oil, the fat of choice for me. And then you put some spices and you temper it. I don't know if you understand tempering. So that the flavors infuse the. I'm just wondering if Carolyn understands, because obviously she doesn't cook Indian food.
I have a go if you don't mind, and I try my spices. I've been listening.
Excellent. And then basically you have this liquid mixture, which is yogurt, gram flour. It's watered down, and you add it to this the ghee, which is to temper it, and then you put that in, and then you bring it to the boil and you let it simmer, and it's a lovely dish. And yeah, like I said, it does have some gram flour in it to thicken it.
And what would you serve that with?
Normally rice.
Normally people put it on rice. However, they could just drink it with a spoon like a soup. That is an option.
Or that's a really good cauliflower rice.
Someone's just asking, how do you make cauliflower rice? So can you just quickly...
Okay, right. So cauliflower rice, if you've got a food processor, it's the easiest. If you haven't and you've got the patience for it, you could grate your cauliflower. But I stick a cauliflower in. I've got a reasonably decent sized food processor, so I'll just roughly chop a cauliflower and some broccoli if I've got it, but cauliflower on its own will do. Stick that in the food processor and pulse it for a couple of goes to get it to little granules that look a bit like rice. And then all I do is I've usually sweated off a bit of an onion with either some ghee or some olive oil or something. And I tend to have my own homemade stock in the fridge. So I might just add a couple of spoons of that into the pan, stir it all through, and then put a lid on and leave it on a very low heat for a few minutes while I'm finishing off the curry or whatever I'm doing with it. And it just sweats through. I'll chuck in some cumin seeds sometimes, because I really love cumin seeds, or some cumin or coriander powder. any spices that you fancy. You could stick, make it like a pilau if you wanted to, with cardamom and what have you. You can put whatever you want in there. But basically, it's just going to be a base for your curry. So it doesn't have to be that strongly flavoured itself, because if you've got plenty of curry sauce, it's going to absorb that anyway. But literally, it only takes 5 minutes really to cook. So it's quicker than rice in terms of when I've got my curry going, I just get the cauliflower and get that sorted and pop that into a separate pan, and then it's ready to go. A sort of smallish cauliflower will just about do 2 people. So you do need, if you've got a big group, you need either a couple of big cauliflowers, or if it's 4 of you, you need a decent sized cauliflower. But dead easy to do. And say I do it with broccoli as well. The other thing I sometimes do is shred a cabbage and just toss that in some ghee and, wilt it down and have that as the base. Because it's just psychological that you have to have the rice there. So it's just having something to pop your curry sauce on. So, be creative with vegetables. And say I roast an awful lot of vegetables now. And I just absolutely love cauliflower and broccoli roasted. Just break it into the florets, toss it in some oil with, I often use cumin and turmeric and things like that. I love salt with it as well. And the other thing is, don't be frightened of salt, particularly if you're going low carb, because you will lose more salt, because carbs make you hold salt. So I chuck in a bit of salt and toss it all around, and then onto a baking tray in a hot oven for about 20 minutes, and it goes all lovely and crispy, and that is delicious. So
yeah. With all of that, I normally use as a base, I use cos lettuce and use that as a chapati or roti.
Yeah.
Just my filling on.
And lettuce leaves are great used instead of a wrap. And the other thing you can do if you do eat eggs is instead of making an omelette, is just to beat a couple of eggs up and let them go into a hot frying pan, and don't stir them up. Just let them go like a pancake almost. And that makes a good wrap.
All right. I'll try that.
And because that's protein, that will really help to fill you up.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a lady who's said, Women to Women have a recipe group. So why don't you put your recipes on there? I would tell Urvashi she can join our low carb group and learn from there, because the other group has mixture of recipes and it's just going to get muddled up.
I think so, because we've already had a sort of bit of muddling with our own WhatsApp group. So
exactly.
The other recipes might not all be low carb, but Daksha and I are always putting lots onto the WhatsApp group. I know if you join, you can't go back in the history. So just ask again if you want a recipe for something like the low carb breads and what have you that we've done, or but again, don't be afraid to Google. There are so many ketogenic diet is just a kind of name for a really low carb diet. So to be truly keto, you should be 20 grams or less of carbs a day. But don't be frightened to look at keto websites for some of their recipes. But there's loads of really good recipes out there now on Google for low carb, and quite a lot of vegetarian ones as well. So, you can find an awful lot on the internet. One thing I would just say is recipes that are using real food, great. And, hopefully nobody that's really interested in their health is going to be using any of the substances that we've suggested you don't use, like sunflower oil, etc. But what I would say is the food industry is very quick to look at trends, and you will see a lot of pre-packaged low carb keto bars and things now. Steer away from those, because anything that's been made by industry will nearly always have ingredients that we wouldn't recommend. So
and always cheap fats in them as well.
Yeah, cheap fats and extra bits and bobs that don't need to be there. And they're just after your money. They don't really care about your health. So food manufacturers will always spot a trend and try and capitalize on it. And the best way we can look after ourselves is with real food, which is really stuff that we make ourselves from natural ingredients.
Yeah. Hunter's made a point about making ghee. She says you can make it without ghee. So I think she's saying that you can make it completely without fat. However, I feel that's because of the low fat messaging. So actually the ghee is probably one of the healthiest bits of the ghee, you know, and the fat is what keeps us fuller for longer.
Please don't be frightened of good fat. We need it.
We need
our body and our brain is actually made of significant amounts of fat. So please don't be frightened of healthy fats. This is another myth that has grown up, unfortunately. Don't forget, you can look at past presentations on the YouTube channel, and I have done one on fats and cholesterol. It's not healthy to go really low fat. And in fact, all the evidence suggests that longevity is improved with a good balance of healthy fats. And I've mentioned him before, but I have an uncle who's 100, whose cholesterol has been 8.2 for as long as cholesterol's been measured by doctors. And he's never taken a statin. He's refused all medication. He's as bright as a button. He's completely with it and very active at 100. And yet, if you listen to the cholesterol doom mongers, he should have been dead 30, 40 years ago. And in fact, lots of studies now show that the mortality rates are worse in people with very low cholesterol than in people with high cholesterol. Cholesterol is actually quite an essential component of our bodies. Our brains rely on a lot of cholesterol. So it's just another myth that's out there that's frightened people so much that they're not having anything like enough healthy fats rather than too much. And eggs particularly were demonized for an awfully long time, and they are a very healthy, nutritious source of protein and fat.
Before we come to an end, somebody earlier asked about Ryvita, you know, and having cottage cheese. Ryvita is literally without any nourishment for your body at all. I've just looked it up because I think in the WhatsApp group I did recommend an app called Chronometer.
Oh yes.
And when you put a food in that, I've literally just done that on my phone. I've put in Ryvita and it says there's a little bit of fat in it, 0.2 grams, 6.7 grams is carbohydrates, and there's 0.9 grams of protein. And when I then look to see what vitamins are in it, it's like it's got nothing, no vitamins, hardly. It's got a tiny bit of sodium, which is from the salt. But other than that, it's got nothing. So why would you want to put that in your body? You know, I encourage you to think of your body as your temple.
Yeah.
You know, literally think of your body as a temple, and that temple needs to be nourished. So you want food that's got all the vitamins, the vitamin D's, the E's, the A's, the C's, all the colors of the rainbow.
Yeah.
Ryvita is no color, nothing.
No.
There's nothing.
It's like cardboard. It's as good as cardboard. You can make. I've got a recipe, which again I'll try and remember to post on the WhatsApp group, for crackers. Now they've got an egg in them, so it's no good if you don't eat eggs. But
I think I've got a recipe for crackers that doesn't have eggs in them.
Right. Well, if you find yours, I'll put mine on. Mine's ground almonds and sesame seeds and an egg. And you make a little dough and roll it out and bake it, and that makes the most delicious little crackers to have with cheese or whatever you want, but takes the place of crackers very nicely. And it's quite filling because it's ground almonds, but there's some protein in there as well. But there are recipes out there for that kind of thing without the egg as well. So again, anything that comes out of a packet's usually not great. Neat's just put on there, but doctors don't leave us alone if cholesterol is high. I know they don't, but it's your body and it's your right to ask questions and say what will happen to me, because there's no evidence that statins, etc., prolong your life by a single day. And they're going by guidelines, unfortunately, which have been created by vested interests from the pharmaceutical industry. And you know, cholesterol is not the harmful substance. It doesn't just go and bung up your arteries like fat down a plug hole does. It's much more nuanced. And if you want to know a bit more about cholesterol, have a look at last month's talk on the YouTube channel, because I covered it then. Cholesterol is actually quite important to the body. And a lot of doctors don't understand that. Doctors don't get an awful lot of nutrition training, unfortunately. So they're kind of blinded by the pharmaceutical industry blurb when they get it, and know no better. But there are plenty of studies that show that very low cholesterol is far more dangerous than high cholesterol.
Okay.
Carolyn, a couple of people have asked about the slides that you had earlier.
Well, they'll be on the YouTube.
Yeah.
Panna, I don't know if she'll be able to, but Panna sometimes posts them separately onto the WhatsApp.
Yeah.
She's able to pull them out and post them. Because when I've tried to do it, people haven't been able to download them. But the YouTube, the whole thing will be on the YouTube, so you'll be able to see them there.
There you are.
Caroline, is it true if we have less carbs, you can eat more fat?
Absolutely. Because your body is designed to run on fat. So it will break it down and use it for energy, as long as it's the healthy fats.
Yeah, exactly.
And you need, when you don't eat carbs, you do need to have that combination of protein and fat to keep you satisfied and nourished. So absolutely, if you try and cut out carbs and don't add in fat, then you will be hungry, unless you're eating a huge amount of protein, which if you're vegetarians, I know you won't be. So I think particularly for vegetarians, it's really important that you get that adequate fat in to keep you satisfied.
Is there an amount of vegetables that you can eat in a day, about 150 grams, something like that?
No, because vegetables vary hugely in their carb content, there's no recommended amount, but I would obviously go for the bigger proportion being the leafy vegetables.
Yeah.
You need to watch the root vegetables, because they're the carby ones.
They've got high content.
Even carrots and parsnips are, are carby. But it's as much as you can eat really of the leafy vegetables. So all the cabbages and spinach and lettuce and so forth, you can have as much of that as you need, but you'll be more satisfied if you've got a bit of fat there. So a nice dressing or a homemade mayonnaise to help fill you up and make it tastier. I mean, the great thing is fat makes things tastier. So, being able, that's why I do a lot of the roasting of vegetables. And it's not a lot of fat that's going in, but I'm tossing them in some nice olive oil or whatever. And it just adds that bit of extra oomph and taste.
So Caroline, curry's done with a lot of oil. Is it okay?
As long as the oil is a good quality oil.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're trying to lose weight, just remember that fat is very energy dense. So if you're having loads of fat, you'll struggle to lose the weight. But most of us can't tolerate huge quantities of fat. Our bodies kind of know that you shouldn't have overdo the fat. But don't underdo it, because then you'll be hungry and your food won't be as tasty.
That's right.
But also choose your fats carefully. There must be good quality natural fats, not these horrible industrialized ones.
No. All right, thanks.
Which reminds me, for those of you that do eat butter, please do not have any of the spreadable butters. It should be the nice blocks of proper pure butter, because the spreadable ones have all had horrible things added to them to make them spreadable. So go for your pure butters.
So we've changed now to the pure butter. We used to have spreadable all the time. And sunflower oil.
Yeah. I know. And even some of the good chefs' recipes that I look at say use a vegetable oil or a sunflower oil. I think, no.
We know better.
They should know better.
And we know better. So that's good.
Is the best?
Yeah.
Which butter would you reckon is the best?
Well, we want if at all possible, a good British brand, and it's nice to know if it's grass-fed. So I say British, but actually Kerrygold is Irish, and now since Brexit, Ireland is a very different country. But Kerrygold isn't a known good grass-fed. But if it's English butter. Most of our cows are grass fed.
Thank you. Thanks.
So, you know, you just want the best quality you can get.
Thanks.
But any butter will be better than a vegetable oil.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone, it's already 9.
Yes, we probably should.
We should be.
Oh, yeah. So I hope it's been helpful tonight. And if we can keep the WhatsApp group to sort of discussions as opposed to people posting stuff that might be contradictory to what we're saying on here. Not that I don't want to be questioned, but sometimes stuff is posted, and if I have time, and I don't always have time to scrutinize it, but I might scrutinize it and find that actually it's got a lot of contradictory stuff in it. So we really want it to be questions that we can simply answer, or a request maybe for a recipe or something like that, rather than people posting loads and loads and loads of stuff that then gets very hard for us to find our way through, apart from anything else.
Understandable. I'm the culprit. Sorry about that.
Sorry?
I am the culprit, one of the culprits.
Oh,
Sorry about that.
oh, don't worry. I mean, I know people are sort of trying to be helpful, but the problem is because there's a lot of people on there now, we suddenly get bombarded with posts, and it's hard for Daxa and I to go through it and find the stuff to comment on. So, you know, if we can keep it to questions and answers to sort of bridge the gap between the meetings. And, you know, if there's something you genuinely think is good, perhaps put it on, say, what do you think?
That's right.
And let us have a discussion about it.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't want to clamp down at all on people doing their own research. And if you think you found something really great, let's have a look and share it and see what we think. Because we do want you to, you know, to explore this whole area yourselves. And there is lots of information out there. We just need to be wary that there's some that's better than others.
Well, it's been a learning experience knowing other groups and being on this group. So thank you very much.
Oh, well, as long as it is being helpful, that's what we hope for.
Caroline, we need to agree to another date.
Well, I think we had agreed that it's going to be the first Tuesday. So I think that takes us to the 5th of April.
5th, okay, because we've got something happening on the 6th. So 5th, okay. If everything's okay with Panna, then it will be that date. Otherwise, we'll put a different date if we have to change. We'll do that, I mean, on the group.
Yeah, the earlier the better. Unfortunately, Daxa and I can't do Wednesdays now. So if the 5th doesn't suit, we might be able to do the 12th. But
no, 5th should be fine. We've got something planned for 6th. So 5th should be fine. So unless
we did agree, I think, at the beginning of the year that we try and go for the first Tuesday, sorry, of each month.
Okay. All right.
But topic wise, again, we thought, because there are now lots of YouTube videos with the different presentations of me sort of looking at different areas of diet, that just going over and over again the presentations, that maybe people should use that as a reference point. And then if you've got questions, we can do what we've done tonight, which is really to have a good discussion about things rather than me just talking at you.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming over. Thank you, Daksha. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you, everyone.
much.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you,
Good night.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Night.
Bye. Bye, Tara.
Bye.
Bye, Sarah Queen.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Satna.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye. Good night. Oh, thank you, Daksha. Thank you, Caroline.